Video contains instructions for your final task for this unit, the culminating task, which is creating a fantasy cityscape. So let's look at the learning goals and success criteria, and then we'll look at what a fantasy cityscape could look like. So here's your learning goal. We are learning to use the techniques of two-point perspective in order to draw a fantasy cityscape, giving the illusion of 3D on a flat or 2D surface. So you can pause the video now and have a look at the success criteria. In order to be successful at your learning goal, you have to make sure that you have achieved these success criteria. And this is how you're being marked on this final task for the unit. So you're always going to be marked on your effort, creativity, and design or detail, whether or not it's an interesting or unique cityscape, as it's supposed to be a fantasy cityscape, so it shouldn't just be plain or normal or boring. Then, of course, your ruler and accuracy. So have you used a ruler for all your lines? Are all the appropriate lines leading to the appropriate vanishing points? Are the vertical lines indeed vertical? Windows, doors, and signs should all be correct. And then your shading and neatness is in terms of your coloring. So are you shading or coloring neatly and accurately? Are you using multiple values, for example, in the grass? And does the color get lighter as it gets closer to the vanishing point? And then also you're being marked, as always, on your classwork skills. How are you using your class time, and how are you treating the material, as well as how are you cleaning up? So let's look at some examples of cityscapes, fantasy cityscapes. These are going to be examples that exemplify effort, creativity, and detail or design. Here's an excellent example of a fantasy cityscape. So this student chose a beautiful theme of Monopoly. So it's Monopoly Land. And I think the most successful part of this, aside from the amazing details, like including some of the playing pieces, is definitely in the contrast. This student has pressed so hard with their pencil crayon that they've really achieved a beautiful level of contrast. Let's look at another example for effort, creativity, detail, and design. So this one is definitely a little bit messy, but what I wanted to point out is the detail. So this one, if Monopoly was a level 4 detail, this one would probably be level 3 plus detail. There's some really interesting aspects, including in Gringotts Wizarding Bank. You can see one of the goblins there. And each little building has little details attached. I think if it was neater, the details would be a little clearer, and then that would bump up the mark. Here's another example. So this theme was Paint World or Art World, and each building reflects something having to do with art. So Canvas Club, Brush Bunch, Bucket Boutique. And so this is a really strong, creative fantasy cityscape design. And I think this student really did a nice job of bringing in multiple colors. The only thing that's wrong is there's something wrong with the sidewalk. So have a look. I'm going to give you a second to see if you can see what's wrong with the sidewalk. So hopefully you figured it out. It looks like the sidewalk is actually standing up. And that's simply because each of these lines on the left side of the sidewalk should be leading to the right vanishing point, not up into Nowheresville. And on the right side of the sidewalk, each of these ones should be leading to the left vanishing point. So that's just a really great reminder to make sure that you're watching each tutorial video before you do it. So if you're including a sidewalk in your cityscape, make sure you watch the sidewalk tutorial video. Here's another strong example of a theme. So this student did Cardland, and each building reflects different cards or different suits, and I think they did a great job at that. You might notice that the road looks a little bit funny, and that's just simply because each of these road lines should be getting skinnier as they reach the vanishing point, and they should actually reach the vanishing point. But it was neatly done. There's some interesting shading and some really interesting detail. Not a lot of color, but that's okay because it's decks of cards. Here's another really great example of a theme. So this is like junk food type land, and I really think this student did an excellent job of using color to create contrast. So everything has been shaded with a lot of pressure, which means that you've got a lot of color and everything is standing out very nicely. Here's another excellent example of a really cool theme. These are all things that this student likes. So you've got fireworks, Smosh, Harry Potter, Alice in Wonderland. These are all things that that student liked, and they've done a really great job again of using a lot of pressure with the pencil crayon to create contrast. Here's another example of a strong theme. So this is music and dance. Here's another great example of a strong theme. I think this was Minecraft or something along those lines. I can't remember right now. Maybe it was UFO land. I can't remember. But even though there's not a lot of buildings here, it's really successful. It's an interesting cityscape. He's got a UFO floating here. He's got like a hole in the ground. There's some interesting details in there. Here's another one that's based on movies that were popular at the time. I think the student probably could have added some more details. So, on the Hairspray building, maybe there also could have been hair. On the Giver building, they could have also included the sled or something along those lines. But they could have provided a little more detail. So this would probably be, in terms of creativity and effort and detail, this would probably be level 3-. Let's look at another example. So this is a very clever example. It's a theme of The Walking Dead, but the student absolutely could have added more detail. They've got one zombie here. They could have added a ton more. And while each of the buildings are cool, they look like they're sort of shut down and bleeding. They could have had some more details in those buildings. So this would probably be a level 2+ in terms of the detail. Here's one that's definitely maybe a level 2, probably a level 1. So everything is really neatly done, but how does this building represent the Maple Leafs other than the fact that it's blue and white? I think there could have been a lot more detail put into it. And this is an example of a level 1, if that, because there's no theme to it at all. I can't figure it out anyway. So I think the student could have put a lot more effort into it. Let's look at some examples for ruler and accuracy so that you can see how to achieve full marks for ruler and accuracy use. So this student did a lovely job. It's a cool theme. It's Game World. The only problem is when they went over all these lines with a fine liner, they chose not to use a ruler, which really defeats the purpose of having used a ruler in the first place. So it's quite sad that they lost so many marks for that. Here's an example. Each of these little signs had a legend to tell you what the signs mean. So the theme is a little bit boring, but the point of looking at this one is just for you to see that this sign and this sign are incorrect. And what you'll learn when you watch the tutorials for windows and doors are that if the window is on the left side of the building, the top and bottom edge of the window should be leading to the left vanishing point. If it's on the right side of the building, the top and bottom edge of the sign should be leading to the right vanishing point. Here's another great example of why you need to be using a ruler. Just by virtue of the fact that the student didn't use a ruler, everything just looks messy. And of course, it's a dance theme, which is fine, but there could be a lot more details. Here's some examples for shading or adding color and neatness. So this is what I mean when I say you haven't used enough contrast. The student barely pressed their pencil crayon to the paper, and so nothing stands out. Everything's kind of fading into the background. So that's definitely something that you want to practice, is adding more contrast. Now you can start light. That's a great idea to start out like this, but once he knew where everything should go, he really should have started adding some more pressure. The student chose to only include some color, which could be effective in some respects, but leaving the ground white, leaving all the buildings mostly white, just makes it look like they got lazy. So you definitely want to make sure that you're adding color to everything. Also, in the sky, while this creates a lot of movement, which is interesting, you should be shading in smaller sections, and you'll see that when you get to the tutorials for shading. Here's a really great example of math land. So each building has something to do with math, and the student did a nice job. I just wanted to show you that things get lighter as they get closer to the vanishing point, and the student has shaded in small sections, which I think is very effective. They could be putting more values into the grass. Here's another great example of using some great contrast, and there's also some nice details in this one. So this one is Music Land, and the student did a nice job as well of putting interesting color into it. And they tried to add multiple values into the grass. I think they could have done a little bit more, especially down by the bottom where it should look a little bit darker. So those are just some examples of some cityscapes. What I want to show you now is what you're going to be doing for your culminating task. So you're going to be choosing a theme. You're going to be creating a very rough copy, and then you must have that rough copy approved by me. Then what you're going to do is you're going to look at this document, which is going to be in your Google Classroom. It's called 2-Point Perspective Culminating Task Video Links. And you're going to be clicking on whichever link applies to you. So if in your good copy you are including a sidewalk and a road, you must watch this video. If you're including buildings, you must watch this video. If you're not including brick buildings, don't bother watching the bricks video. Once you have laid everything out onto your good copy paper in pencil, you then must have your work approved by me before you start adding color. If you start adding color and you've made some mistakes, there's no going back. You'll have to start again. Then, once you're ready, you can watch any of these tutorial videos about shading. And shading a building, it's up to you how you want to shade it. Because it's a fantasy land, also keep in mind that if you're having blue trees, that's just fine. So you don't have to shade them in the traditional way that I show you how to in this video. So those are the instructions for your good copy, your culminating task, your final task, your cityscape, your fantasy cityscape for this unit. So get to drawing. Rough copies should be starting now. Don't forget to include the image of your rough copy when you're done, and check it with me before you go ahead and start looking at these tutorial videos for the good copy.